Good morning, Shabbat Shalom, and welcome. For the next 45 minutes or so, we hope to be able to give you an insight into some of our thoughts about whether communal prayer is a collaborative experience for liberal Jews. To do that, we will each reflect on the transformation of Jewish communal prayer from sacrificial worship to service of the heart. We will also explore a little of our own experiences of communal prayer and leave you with some questions in your own mind to take into the Shabbat morning service shortly after this discussion. For most of us, when we think about communal prayer, we are probably immediately already thinking about the Siddur and the liturgy contained therein. But whilst the word liturgy in some ways translates the Hebrew word avodah, I don't think it ends there. Broadly speaking, I think I would define liturgy as the drama of worshiping God, because liturgy is not just the words that are recited. It is, whether it's fixed or spontaneous, it also includes the actions, the occasions for the worship, and the gathering of the participants. Liturgy is in some ways akin to a screenplay, because different directors will do different things with screenplays, and so different liturgical moments also have their flexibility according to the director or the actor involved. Judaism has a broad range of liturgies. Worship in formal prayer in a synagogue at one of the appointed times is only one kind of Jewish liturgical expression, and I wouldn't even say it was the most common. The most common liturgical moments are those occasional blessings that we traditionally recite upon performing certain commandments or mitzvot, when we eat, when we experience a wondrous act of nature, rituals like wedding ceremonies, the Passover Seder, Brit Milah, putting a mezuzah on the doorpost of a new home. They're all liturgical activities that have their own choreography and text. So these are collaborative in the sense that we do these in collaboration with fellow Jews across time and geography. But what we really want to talk about today is the first one, and whether or not being together in a synagogue is a collaborative experience for us, or just a convenient way for lots of individual Jews to get together whilst they do their own thing. What's really interesting for me is that the way we worship now isn't at all how it always was. And the Jewish ability to give new meaning to old concepts, or to be completely able to reconceptualize something altogether is quite a testament to our ingenuity as a people. Our liturgy as it is today is designed for communal worship, but it includes so many prayers and concepts that would have been found in the temple in Jerusalem before it was destroyed. What we don't find in our modern synagogues is sacrifice in the way we would have found it in the temple. There are, according to the Bible, several things that can be sacrificed. And I think most people, if asked what was sacrificed in the temple, they would go to animals. But it was also possible for grain, wine, or incense to be offered as well. The general biblical word for sacrifice is korban. And I think it's really important that this word is derived from the Hebrew root, meaning closeness or nearness. So we can absolutely see already that the purpose of sacrifice was to bring people nearer to God. The smoke of the incense was understood by many ancient cultures, not just by Jews, to have literally carried the prayers, the devotion, the intentions of people upwards to God. And the sacrifice of animals and other goods was intended to do the same. The sacrifice itself was this massively dramatic performance by priests who wore elaborate clothing, stood at an elaborate altar in an elaborate building, and recited prayers, the whole time, just singing and chanting and in some ways dancing on behalf of those who were watching. But I don't think it can be said that any of these performances were participatory in the way that the synagogue service is today. Beyond providing the material for sacrifice, the ordinary non-priestly people who were present at the temple wouldn't have been collaborating in the act in any other way. So for me, what you see in the temple is a real hierarchy of who can and who can't do formal liturgy. We know from biblical texts that sins were classified in levels according to their seriousness, and therefore the animal offered had to differ depending on what it was you were atoning for. We also know that women, for example, were required to offer sacrifice at specific times that didn't apply to men, such as after childbirth. But I don't really know how much one would successfully argue that this solidarity with those who were in the same situation with you was really a collaborative experience. I think I would argue that maybe the true collaborative experience in the temple would have come from the act of being together, to witness the sacrifice, to experience the smell, to dance and pray with other people who were also partaking, who also weren't partaking in the formal liturgy. In a way, making a distinction between keva, the formal side of things, and kavana, the intentional side of things. You see a real physical demarcation of these two things. And I wonder if perhaps it's the spirit of that liberal Jews carry with us when we worship today. Now I give the floor to, well, metaphorical floor, to Rabbi Janet Burden.
Observed, the main form of worship for the earliest Jews was the sending up of a reach nichoach, a sweet savor to please or to appease God. Offering up words instead of sacrifices or incense was, at least at one time, so strange that when Hannah is seen by the high priest Elli pouring out her words of supplication, he assumed that she was simply drunk. Communal prayer in a form that might be recognizable to us today began in the Second Temple period with the creation of synagogues, both inside Eretz Israel and outside it, wherever the Jewish people dwelled. These synagogues served a dual purpose, functioning both as meeting places where community affairs could be discussed, as well as centers for prayer. Prayer at that time was still understood as an offering that somehow had to be sent up, kind of like the smoke, to God. For this reason, most communities would appoint, either formally or informally, a shliach tzibur, an emissary or a public envoy, who would be responsible for leading, or more literally for sending or transmitting, the prayers of the community to God. Public worship was deemed to have greater merit than private prayer. The traditional explanation for this is that communal worship allows certain prayers to be recited or responded to. These specific prayers are well known to us. The community call to prayer, the Baruch Hu, the responses of the Kedusha, Kaddish, and so on. And you can find the references in Megillah 23b. However, with my sociologist's hat on, I would judge that explanation to be circular. There had to have been an ab initio assumption that the power of prayer is magnified in a gathering. Whether that gathering has to be the number of 10 for a minyan was in dispute until the period of the Geonim, post-Talmudic. So how might our rabbinic sages have understood how this intensification of prayer would take place? Although I cannot find the original source for it, I was taught in the American conservative movement that the shliach tzibur functioned like a prism, taking in light from all directions, concentrating it, and sending it up like a laser to pierce the heavens. If that were indeed how communal prayer worked, then it would be a collaboration par excellence. But much as I like that image itself, I see a number of problems with it as a model. First of all, I do not fundamentally believe that we are sending our prayers heavenwards or up in any meaningful way. Whilst I would not want to belabor the point, the Hebrew verb to pray, lahitpalel, is not transitive. Grammatically, at least, nothing is being sent anywhere. I understand that this might be a disturbing thought for some, especially those who think of God as a being out there. Personally, I've never believed in that kind of a God who might directly answer a supplication. Moreover, like Maimonides, I cannot accept the idea of a God who somehow needs our prayers. We are the ones who need to pray. Homiletically, we might observe that the verb's grammatical form, the hitpa'el, is reflexive. Are we listening to what we say, as Rabbi Lionel Blue used to ask? Are we working on ourselves? I like it. But as Rabbi Louis Jacobs noted, one can't really push that reading beyond the homiletical. The verb is a hitpa'el because it is somehow relational. Even a reflexive meaning is relational. It says something about our relationship to ourselves. There are other relations also expressed in the Hitpa'el form, one of which is reciprocity, as in the modern Hebrew Hitzkarev, a different form of the Kuf Resh Bet that Rafe referred to earlier, but that means to become close or to approach each other. I like that one much better. The most essential meaning of the Hitpa'el form is of the root Pei Lamed Lamed offers yet another kind of relation, to intervene, interpose, hence to intercede or to arbitrate. Certainly, one traditional type of prayer is intercessionary, praying on behalf of others. That might have been what the priests were doing in the temple, but I certainly do not believe that this is what a rabbi or any other shaliach or shlichat tzibur is doing in a liberal Jewish context today. To paraphrase Rabbi Lionel Blue again, I am not a rabbi so that I might do Judaism for others. I am there to help people do Jewishly for themselves. Personally, I find that prayer works best when the focused intention of all present meets and connects. This is facilitated best by regular contact with each other and by sharing a common language for the speech act, if you will, that we call prayer. For me, that language is not just the Hebrew liturgy, but also the English of the translations, the framework of the meditations, and the understanding and the spirit of the poetry. The more we share these points of reference in common, the more connected we become. And that, for me, is the beauty of collaborative communal worship. And now I'd like to hand over to Elli, who's been helping us to forge a way ahead in the collaborative nature of communal prayer.
Rafe and Janet have explored Jewish worship from the priestly service Avodah through the emergence of service of the heart, Avodah Shebalev, in which the Shaliach Tzibur, the emissary of the community, facilitates the communal experience. I would like to turn to the arena of liberal Judaism specifically. If we peruse the development of liturgy within LJ over the course of the 20th century, not only does it get longer and move towards greater inclusion of Hebrew, with the publication of Siddur Lev Chadash in 1995, we see the reintroduction of the traditional structure of services. So, for example, if we look at the Shabbat morning service in Siddur Lev Chadash, you will see that it's structured around a series of, these are Birchot HaShach, literally blessings of the morning, which are translated as morning prayers. Pesukei de Zimra, literally verses of song, translated as songs of praise. Shema uvechotecha, the Shema and its blessings. Tefillah, literally prayer, referred to as a daily prayer. Kriyat HaTorah, the reading of the Torah. And concluding with Aleinu and its companion prayer, Al Kain, followed by the Kaddish and Adon Olam, presented now with the heading Concluding Prayers and Songs. The only section that's missing, which is found in traditional liturgy, is Musav, the additional service between the reading of the Torah and the concluding prayers in which the Tefillah is repeated. In the draft Shabbat morning service introduced in 2018, we have made the structure of the service even more explicit, with the introduction of explanatory passages ahead of each section and a running list of the service sections on the far left of a double page, indicated in bold. Oh, I've done it again. In the draft Shabbat morning service introduced in 2018, we've made the structure of the service even more explicit, with the introduction of explanatory passages ahead of each section and a running list of the service sections on the far left of a double page, indicating in bold the particular section of the service. In addition, the service flows continuously without the need to jump pages 3 times to get to the Shema and its blessings, the Torah service, and finally the concluding prayers. I'd like to begin my remarks in response to the question, is communal prayer a collaboratory experience for liberal Jews by posing another question. From the perspective of congregants, in what way does highlighting of the structure of the service in Siddur Lev Chadash and the new prayer book Siddur Shirah Chadashah make a difference to the experience of participating in the service? I shall leave this question with you and explore an element in the structure of the service that's not immediately explicit, which relates directly to the dynamic between the individual and the community. Some of the sections mark major turning points in the service. The most significant of these is the Shema and its blessings. This section begins with the Baruch Hu, the call to prayer. If you look at the 1967 prayer book, Service of the Heart, you will see that it opens with the Baruch Hu. This may seem unremarkable. After all, the service is beginning, so it seems obvious that the community is being called to prayer. So why, in the traditional structure followed by Siddur Lev Chadash and Siddur Shirah Chadashah, is the Baruch Hu postponed, so that it follows the morning blessings and the songs of praise? The traditional structure of the service recognizes that when we arrive at the service, we are not yet we. Each individual enters the service as an individual. So the opening sections of the service, couched variously in the I form and the we form, express the concerns and perspectives of the individual, which are simultaneously and paradoxically universal concerns. The blessings, prayers, and songs acknowledge the individual's experience of being alive. For example, Elohai neshama shenatata bi tohorahi. My God, the soul you have given me is pure. It is only when we, that is each individual, has had time to explore their personal, universal concerns, that all the individuals gathered together for the service actually come together as a community with the Baruch Hu. And then, having come together, we go on to recite our core beliefs as a people, that God is the creator of the world, the one who reveals Torah as an act of covenantal love to the people Israel, the eternal one, and following the Shema, the liberator of the people Israel from Egypt onwards. The evening service adds an additional blessing, recognizing God as the one who spreads over us a shelter of peace as we face the prospect of going to bed. It's important to note, by the way, that the Shema and its blessings not included in Mincha, the afternoon service, because the Shema is only recited when we lie down and when we rise up. So the theory underlying the structure of the service is that in order to be a community at prayer, individuals need time to prepare themselves to become a community at prayer. But what about the practice? Do individuals feel that they're on a journey into communal prayer? Do individuals feel that communal prayer is collaborative, enabling each one of us as an individual to share in a collaborative communal experience?
That's actually a really interesting question, Elli, because I think for me, communal worship has taken on so many guises over my life, I guess. In some ways, I think I definitely approach worship as an individual. I definitely turn up to the synagogue as an individual, but there's to sort of bring it back to where I was talking about drama. There's definitely the drama brings everything together for me, and I think what's really interesting is finding ways as individuals, as separate Jews en masse in a synagogue, finding ways to be the priest in the temple, to not just rely on the rabbi to create something for us. Again, going back to what Janet said, the rabbi's job for me is to lead, but not to do for. And I think I don't know. I think that for me, at least, liturgy, communal worship, it has to be a collaborative experience. Otherwise, it doesn't quite work. And yes, it has different parts at different stages where one of us is the leader or one of us is not the leader. But that's for me, it just doesn't work if it's not collaborative. And I think whether we all as liberal Jews approach it that way, I don't know. But definitely, I have tried over the years to get to that point. I mean, Ellie, I don't know if it's the same for you.
Well, it's really interesting that you should say it like that, because I think that actually I've not reflected so much about my individual experience until I was in a situation and faced with my first ever streamed service in an empty synagogue. And I'm doing more or less the same thing. I'm addressing the congregation, I'm addressing a camera, I'm leading, prayers, I'm inviting people to participate. We've mentioned the page numbers and all of that. And I'm singing, and I'm presuming people are singing at home. But it doesn't feel like that at all. So it feels like I'm sort of an individual who's been marooned somewhere. And it feels very, very weird. My whole body language, I move quite a lot in the service. I sort of sway a lot. I'm sort of very engaged and responding to the sense of what's going on in the service and people's voices and everything. And I find that with the camera, I'm sort of standing quite rigidly, thinking I must look in the right direction. And actually, but what it comes back to is actually the experience of being an individual. When I enter anything, I've come on a journey like everybody else has from home, and whatever was going on for me that morning, and whatever I'm feeling and the things that I've been thinking about. And when I come to the synagogue, I begin to sort of shed that a bit and connect with people as I walk in and say hello and do all of those things. But it's only when I'm in the service that actually the sense of what we're doing together takes me over. And so my individual concerns and preoccupations somehow they're not pushed aside and they're not suppressed, but the energy involved in those the personal feelings I have, that energy gets translated into what we are doing together. And for me, that is collaborative. And I'd be interested to know, what do you think, Janet? I mean, how do you relate to this?
Well, it's interesting what you say. I actually experience Zoom services differently than what I assume that people feel when they're doing streamed services, because I can read people's faces a little bit. Although I can't hear them singing with me, I can see whether they are or not. So that there is a difference there for me. But the idea of being all together in one room, my strongest feeling of an effective prayer was actually the day John and I got married. I felt bodily held, really almost bodily held by the people in that room as they sang Psalm 100, the Hariu, and people came together, and it's about this focused intention of everybody in the room meeting and connecting, and that buoyed us up somehow. And I have never quite managed to achieve it. I would love to be able to say that I could feel that in a service. I recognize what you're saying, but often, I wish it weren't true, but often I worry that I do end up just saying words or performing to help. I'm aware of what other people need. I lose myself sometimes in it. And that the idea of there being an outside focus, seems really important to me. I know that's a peculiar way of thinking about it, but there's something about the communal prayer when there is an intention. I feel it on the High Holy Days too. Again, very differently than in the regular Shabbat services. Yeah.
I don't know if people often say to me that this the idea of the High Holy Days is kind of it's a little bit like Marmite. You either love them or you hate them. And I've got friends who absolutely love the Yom Kippur service. I love the Yom Kippur service. It's so intense. It's so, everyone is going through that intensity at the same time. And there is something in that that for me is not always in the regular Shabbat service, because when something becomes part of your routine, I guess, you start to see it differently. And I don't know, I mean, I don't know if it's different for you as rabbis who are effectively leading these services, or whether you can remember a time when you felt it differently. I'm interested to know that, because you know, I'll be where you are within 5 years, and I'm just interested whether I'm going to lose that feeling of Yom Kippur, or whether in your experience, you know, it's really interesting. I don't know, Elli, if you have experienced the same thing as Janet.
I actually don't lose that. I mean, I don't know what it is. I mean, I find Yom Kippur intensely engaging, but I also find Shabbat intensely engaging. And I think one of the reasons for this, I've got some peculiar things actually in my personal history. You know, I was brought up in a family which in a way was quite secular, although we did Friday night, but my dad wouldn't do anything because he was a universalist, and my mum had come from an Orthodox background. But my Bubba lived with us, my mother's mother, for a year, and she used to take me to the Federation Synagogue at the top of the road. And I used to sit with her. And so I was completely immersed in the sort of wave of the music and the way people sang. And that had a really big, and the other times would be when we had a huge family. My mother was the 9th child. It's when we went to family simchas, or when we had Shiva. And there was something about what being with people like that, what happened. It was just amazing. And so I do have a strong sense of that. And I think the mediating thing is music, is the singing. And I mean, this may be an unpopular thing to say in a liberal Judaism context, but I much rather sing the whole service than read it. And, you know, because I do think it's something else happens when we engage, that somehow the musicality engages another part of our brain that isn't just intellectual, and which sort of transforms us in somehow, but as individuals, but also transforms us as a community. And one of the ways that happens in our services in the Kedusha, when we do L'Dor Vador, we do it as a kind of call. The service leader, it could be me or somebody else, does L'Dor Vador, and everybody else, everybody comes back with L'Dor Vador. And it's just so powerful, and that sense of what we're doing together. So I have to say, personally, I haven't felt like that. And in fact, that's been the problem with stream services, that I've been conscious of performance, and that has completely taken the spirit out of me. And I hope that it doesn't show, but I certainly feel it.
Mm.
Well, we promised that we would leave people with some questions to think about. And I think I speak for all three of us when I say that I hope that what we have presented will leave you with some questions. But I know that, Elli, you have some specific questions for people to just hold in their mind as they enter the Shabbat service.
Yeah, well, I'm conscious that obviously this session is before the Shabbat morning service, and it would be nice to think that somehow there was a connection between the sessions and the service. So, yeah, there are 3 questions which I think are going to appear on a screen so everybody can see them. So the first of this is, what difference, if any, does the highlighting of the structure of the service in the Siddur make to my experience of participation? What helps me on my journey into communal prayer as I participate in the service? And finally, the third question, in what ways am I invited as an individual to share in a collaborative communal experience? And it would be great if people would kind of reflect on those questions at the Shabbat morning service.
Thank you for those, Elli, and from me anyway, Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.